Hello. Today we'll start with our another part of this coursework, that is informatic systems. So we'll see how these informatic systems and advanced form of computing systems or networking systems works for the development of a systems engineering domain, how they are been contributing. In this part of informatic systems, we'll see complex systems, software systems, database systems, operating systems. These basically majorly related to the computing systems, that complex systems are used to represent these systems of various domains in some graphs or network or some computational methodology. Then software systems are the programming systems that keep on having versions of software. Then database systems are basically defining some data in the structured format that could be read for processing and for computation purpose. Then operating system is simple. The operating system that we are using, it has various features. So we'll see some of them. Then how that operating system works. We'll just have introduction for all these four things. Then we'll also see the introduction of bioinformatics system, that how this bioinformatics systems was there for the protein-protein interaction, and how the computation takes place for these type of bioinformatics systems. Then social systems, that how the graph of a social media, social network will be done, processed, and how it has been analyzed, and these type of social systems we'll see. Then service oriented system means various web services available on internet, like Google Class, Google Meet, Google Gmailing system. So all these are the services provided by the Google, and Facebook also provides some of the services. Then Instagram also is a kind of service that is available on mobile devices. Then you can see that cloud systems are basically inherited from all these things, services, and these services when jointly together, then they form like Google services, Google Meet, Google Class, Google Gmail, Google Images. So all these things combined together will be said as Google Cloud. Similarly, for other companies like Facebook have Instagram, Facebook itself Facebook.com. Then there are other features like WhatsApp. So all these different services by Facebook company would be like Facebook as a cloud. Then you can have ubiquitous computing, that computing everywhere. So you are using mobiles, you are using watch enabled with your internet, you are using speaker phones and speakers available with enabled with the internet, you are using smart TVs, you are using appliances like air conditioning, and you are using cars that are enabled with some of the electronic internet based GPS system. These are basically ubiquitous computing based things, and these are ubiquitous systems, and they are available and present with the internet computing everywhere. There's another thing like distributed version control system, that actually there are lots of code or data set available. So they are been updating these codes, they are updating these versions of data. So they need to keep them in a repository. So global internet based repository systems are available for the distributed version control systems, like GitHub is there. Then you have software container system. So software container system are like the software when we install and package some software, then they have some dependencies of library on the another old libraries, like we hash include in C programming, like we import some of the Java codes. So these imported classes or hash include headers, all these things are having some codes available, pre-existing code. So these need to be kept with the program that or code that you are writing. So these codes along with these included libraries, so these are like dependencies of your code. The container means your code plus these dependencies means these libraries together. So all these things combined together will be said as container. So we'll see software container systems like Docker Hub or Google App Engine. Then next, we'll start discussing in detail what is complex system. So complex system has influence in many domains like biology and psychology, sociology, computer science itself. So there are various analysis that being done for the emerging properties of these systems, and systems engineering have won this complex system as one of the important theories you can see. And complex systems is one of the independent domain or coursework in itself. You can see these various things that we had seen like complex systems, software systems, database systems. These are actually different independent courseworks in them. So we'll just see the highlights or the basics about these coursework so that you'll have some idea that how this coursework will be done. We'll start with the fundamental things about complex systems. So what is complex system? It is first of all, it is a highly interdisciplinary domain. Means there are many domains available, and these domains are having different kind of complex systems. So in systems engineering, we can say there are simple systems and as well as complex systems. Simple systems means that could be represented in easy manner, but there are some systems which are having complex, and they are difficult to be expressed and represented. Thus, they are said as termed as complex systems. So, complex systems is basically a sub coursework in the systems engineering like thing. The same similar definitions like composed of many components or entities interacting with each other. So what are the examples of complex systems like power grid, transportation, and communication systems? Like another domain is social or economical organizations like cities are there. So these can form a complex system to be represented. Then you can have organisms or living cells, human brains. So all these forms a different kind of complex systems. Like organisms of different kind forms some complex system. Then living cell of a particular species forms a complex system. The human brain have neural networks, neurons, so neuron network. So all these things have a complex nature in them to be studied. Then in ecosystem, climate, or entire universe also could be said as complex system. Then if we want to see in fundamentals what is actually complex system, so complex system is basically an open system with some input and having the surrounded and boundaries which could be produced as an output. It basically complex system deals with the understanding of behavior that are related to very hard to model those type of behaviors, and why they are hard to be modeled, because they have complex dependencies, complex relationships. How they have formed the complex dependencies and complex relationships? Because the interactions between their components or the interactions between the system and its environment is relatively very complex. So the interaction between components and interaction between the systems are actually could be modeled with the help of complex systems, and these could be read as complex systems. We'll see further complex systems and reductionism. So reductionism is an old concept of 16th century. So it's one of the old concepts. So the reductionism is, you can say, fundamental of the complex systems. Like in the reductionism is also saying that there's a system. They explain about the system, and the system have multiple parts, and these parts interact with each other. So in the reductionism, they first define those possible parts, and then they generate various input over the interactions between those parts. Then they perform some deterministic computation on the input data set, and then they aggregate the results. So these are the fundamentals of reductionism, which now carried by the complex system. Then what is complex system? That interpretation from this reductionism. That complex system basically interpreted from this reductionism because it tries to explain both the sum of the various parts or components in the system. The study of various parts together as a sum could be said as complex system and reductionism. Then the complex system properties we can see is non-linearity, emergence, spontaneous order, adaptation, feedback loops. These are the various common property available with most of the complex systems. What is non-linearity? Non-linearity means you had studied matrix theory, polynomial with too many variables, and solving those equations are relatively difficult. So we make matrix, we find some of the determinants, and all these type of theories were there. It's like simultaneous equation that you had studied, set of simultaneous equation with too many variables, and they could form various polynomial degrees, and they are polynomial equations of some more than one or two or three variables, and these are usually higher than the one. If it is having a polynomial degree of one, means it is linear, so linear equation won't be considered. Non-linearity will be considered in the complex systems, like polynomial degree is higher than the one. And then emergence properties. So some of the entities have their property, but they can't able to show their property. Why? Because they have simple properties, and but those many entities coming together, they start showing some property emerge in those properties when they interact with each other. So for example, in these figures you can see that birds are flying, then they are forming some pattern, and when fish are swimming, then they form the various patterns. So fish forms pattern, bird form pattern when they are together, and this is what emergence means, that property of emerging property that interacting together. Then spontaneous order, that is the ordering of a system which get arises when there is interaction of between the component of disordered system. So some of the cases there will be an order of representation. So ordered representation would be there when there is a interaction between different components of disordered system. So there is a one disordered system, but when these the properties inside them, the component inside them will work together and interact together, they form some ordering. So this is spontaneous ordering. Then adaptation. So in the environment, there are various changes keep on happening of almost every system. So the behavior of a system to have mutation or self-organizing behavior towards those changes is some defined as adaptation. So these type of adaptations are being important properties of a complex system. Then feedback loop. So some of the system could have output that are routed back towards the input. That could also create some of the chain of cause and effect that actually form some of the loops or circuits. Then the feedback loops are actually some sequence of input going processed, and then the output going back again as an input, and then the process will be done, and then again output, and output will go as an input with other inputs, and they form some cause and effect of and cyclic behavior, and that forms loop circuits. So this is also one of the important properties. So what are the important properties of complex systems? Nonlinearity, emergence, spontaneous order, adaptation, and feedback loops. Then next, we'll see complex system with other disciplines. That how these other disciplines actually deals, and the statistics, physics. There are various methods of probability theory and statistics and mathematical tools that can represent and that can analyze those complex systems. And the statistics physics actually deals with large population and approximation. So these theories of statistical physics could be applied on complex systems. Then information theory means there are various domains in the computer science and electronics and communication. The one of the common inherited topic is information theory, where this quantification of the signals and the information going will be done. Storage of the various informations was one of the part of this of the signals, and the information going will be done. Storage of the various informations was one of the part of this domain information theory. Communication of these informations, example signals and various type of input and output would be there, analog and digital signals. So all these type of things, like there's change in Shannon theory. So Shannon theory is one of the common theory in the information theory. Then these are actually inherited, information theories are inherited from the three different domains: communication, electronics, and computer science working together. Then next, non-linear dynamics. As we had discussed non-linearity, so there is non-linear dynamic as well. So the change of the output is not proportional to the change of input. So this means that the changes happening in the output and changes happening in the input were not equivalent. You cannot proportionate them. So the change you do in the input will not exactly reflected as a change in output. So there will be some variation. Means you have change in variables over time or space. So you have change in variable over space, and that you form plot it as a nonlinear equations, polynomial equation. Then there's measures of chaotic behavior. Then unpredictability was also there in these type of nonlinear dynamics. Then counterintuitiveness was there in the nonlinear dynamics. Then you have computer science. So computer science is also one of the top related field in complex systems. How computer science supports complex systems. So various kind of programming for creating such complex system, representing those complex systems, are basically held by the computer science. So the applications involving complex real world data analysis, all these things in the complex system could be done with the help of computer science. Sociology means studies of human behavior and social behavior, societies, patterns of social relationships, social interactions, and cultures. So all these things are being studied with the help of social system could be modeled as a complex system. So the sociology could be studied, and the human behavior could also be modeled as a complex systems. Then there is various pattern of social relationship could be modeled as a complex system. So the social interaction could be modeled, culture could be modeled as complex system. Then studying these complex systems will be helpful for the sociology. Then social network analysis. Social network analysis is basically common and in intersection of computer science and sociology, where you have some internet-based information technology enabled social media, and you also have some sociological fundamental concept of sociology. So that means you can investigate those social structure with some networks and graph theory for the internet based social media components. And then you have next as biology system could also be represented with the complex systems, and it's like a study of the life and living organisms and physical structure of chemicals, and the physical structures of molecular interactions could also be there. So in biology all such studies could be possible. Next, we'll see represented with network and graphs. So the complex system could be represented with the help of graph theory. So graphs could be used for modeling and representing and understanding those complex systems that we had seen. How they could be represented? So each node could be representing a component, and these components together could be represented as nodes, and edges or links represent those entities interactions. So there are various entities interacting with each other in a system. So these entities interaction could be represented with the edge or links, then depicting the collection of discrete objects and relationship between them. The complex system could be represented as a graph, and these graphs are actually depicting the collections of discrete objects. Or what are the objects are basically components or entities. Then the relationship could also be depicted with these graphs and representing the complex system. Then what are the examples? For example, relationship between the persons within an organization could be represented with these graphs. Then relationship between the logical gates of the circuits in electronical engineering could be done. Then relationship between genes inside gene regulatory network of biology could be done. Then relationship between the other set of related entities could also be possible. So there are various domains and various ways to represent these edges and nodes, but the fundamental behind this complex system will and the graph theory will remain the same. So you use these complex systems theory and graph theory as a tool for analysis, and that will all inherit and that will all be go to the systems engineering domain, and that will actually give you some highlights and information about that systems. Then the study of the mathematical structure could be done with the help of these graph theories. How these are being done? There are various mathematical structures you can see that are available, and that could be modeled as relationship between these discrete elements of a set. That example, these could be represented elements could be represented as vertices or nodes, and these connections between those vertices could be said as edge, and edge represent the relationship. Vertices or nodes are the connected by edges or links. This is the fundamental about the graphs theory that you had already studied somewhere and you'll study in future. There are basically two types of graphs: undirected graphs and directed graphs. Undirected graphs where the edges link two vertices symmetrically. So means in the undirected graph there's no direction and both the vertices are being connected symmetrically, means they both are having equal representation by the vertex connections. Then directed graph is basically having edge which is directed towards some other element or entity. That edge link two vertices asymmetrically, means A goes to B. That this could be represented with the directed graph where A tends to B, means you form a direction between A and B, and that could be done with the help of directed graph. Then next you have graph as ordered triplet, and this was the common and basic definition about graph, that graph forms a triplet of V as the set of vertices or nodes, E is the set of edges or links, then phi is some indices function that actually tries to map those edges to the unordered pair of vertices. Then you can define these, what are the vertices, you can define in a system what are the edges, then you try to have these connections, and then these connections could be represented with some indices function that is mapping between edges and unordered pair of vertices. So all these things you can do with the graph theory. Then there's network theory. So network theory is basically subset of graph theory. What is the difference between network theory and graph theory? So graph actually represents some symmetric or asymmetric behavior of relationship. If we want to study these symmetric and asymmetric behavior of relationship between these discrete objects, then we are actually dealing with the networks theory. What are the network theory? Network theory actually having nodes and edges with some spatial attributes or a name, means every node belongs to some fixed attribute, and these attributes are actually could be like names, like various entities of a system, and these forms a graph, and this graph could be set as network. So network theories is basically subdomain of graph theory, and network theory is an applied graph theory. When you apply the fundamentals of graph theory, then for a particular domain, then you can say you are doing network theory analysis. Means when you plot and make a graph for a particular domain, then you start saying that this graph belongs to this domain, and that graph will be named as network. For example, you plot a computer network. You make various computers are being connected together with some network, and that makes a computer network. What it was in fundamental, it is graph. Graph is the fundamental behind, means every computer could be a vertices, and these networking lines could be the connections. You can say networking connection could be representing edges. So the computer and these connections and the internet links could be said as vertices and edges, and this forms a graph. So this graph, when you apply for the computer, then you start saying it as a computer network. So this is what, when you apply graph theory into computers domain, then you start saying computer network. Then next, graph or networks theory. So they both have some very common characteristics, and they both have some applications, because graph theory is mother of the network theory. So graph coloring is fundamental problem. Matching is a fundamental problem of graph theories. Then routing problems are basically very common, and problems in both graph and network theory analysis type of things. What is graph coloring? Means coloring of a graph so that you follow some of the definitions that you define. Coloring of graph could be done at various definitions. For example, we consider two type of definitions, like no two adjacent vertices have the same color. So when you define that, you color the graph such that you do not put any two adjacent list as with the same color. Then this is one definition. Then you do coloring of the graph such that no two coinciding edges do not have the same color. So the no two coinciding edges having the same color. So this is the way you define graph coloring, that you'll study in detail graph theory courses. Then matching is one of the problems in graph theories, that actually tries to identify the set of edges without common vertices. Then you have routing problems, for example, shortest path problem, very common and very easy to understand. Then you have minimum spanning trees. Then in the minimum spanning tree, you try to identify and find out a subset of connected edges, which could actually represent some of the connections between all the vertices together, such that it doesn't have any cycle, such that subset of connection do represent some minimum possible total edges weight, so that it could have all the vertices together. You had already studied about these minimum spanning tree. So all these concept, graph theory, matching and routing problems are being applicable to the where in the complex systems. Why we want to study about the systems, like we want to do systems engineering, system theory analysis, then systems thinking we have to improve. So this is why we are applying all these fundamental concepts of graph theory in the complex systems, or to study systems engineering and all these things. Then there's one more fundamental routing problem, which is traveling salesman problem. So this time, this traveling salesman problem is more applied version. So you can see that application coming up, that there's a traveling salesman and he have some problem, or traveling salesman have some problem about how to find the shortest route, and how to find the best possible direction to reach particular city or a location. So this is traveling salesman problem. Now this is applicable to the traveling salesman systems. So there are various traveling salesmen, and they have a large systems. Cities could be represented as vertices, and various roads or the railway lines could be represented as edge. So this is the way you actually model some complex system into the graph or network and apply these type of theories in traveling salesman type of systems. So what we can say that given a list of cities and the distance between the each pair of cities, you have a given cities list of cities and you have given with distance between those pair of cities. Now you need to find out what is the shortest possible route that visits each city exactly once. That traveling salesman want to visit each city once with the shortest possible route and return to the same origin city. Means the traveling salesman want to start from point destination A and it want to go in the all the possible cities B, C, D, E, F, and then with the shortest possible route. And then that traveling salesman want to return back to A. So this is what is traveling salesman problem, and you'll study much in detail in graph theory, and you'll see many applications of this as well. But this course have this much limitation that you we just want to introduce these theories and want to say that these type of theories are applicable to the complex systems, and when you apply these type of theory you can able to identify much information about the that systems, and that improves systems thinking, that will be helpful for the systems theory thing. So that apply these type of theory, and there are many numerous theories like this. So these are just small example of the graph and network theory. Then there are more theories that we are saying, and even more theories than this. So we'll see some more theories like network flows. What is network flow? That network flow have some of the problems, like there is various directed graphs, and these directed graphs have edges. Each edges have the capacity and each have some vertices flow. There is network flow where there is a directed graph where there is each edge actually representing some of the capacity, and these edges receive some of the flow, and these flow are actually have the maximum capacity. So the flow should not exceed the maximum capacity of the that edge. So this forms a network flow, and these type of network flow type of graph will actually be used for studying the graph theories, and applications of these are many. For example, water flow was there, electric current flow was there. So these type of network flow applications were there, and the fundamental theory of graph would applicable for such network analysis. For network flow means directed graph where each edge has a capacity and each edge receives a flow, where the amount of the flow on an edge cannot exceed the capacity of edge. So this type of things were being studied in these graph theories applicable to the various domains like power grid, have net electricity power flowing. Then you have water supply management in which water flow was there. Then you have another set of problem in graph theory, transport problem. What type of problem? It's very obvious, like optimum path of transport was being required and optimum allocation of resources was being required. Very simple problem and to understand, and it's applicable obviously in transportation systems or the computer network packet transportation. So there's communication happen between various computers together. So this packet transfer means the information goes from one computer to another computer in the form of packet. So this packet transportation problem works over there as well. Then the transshipment problem. So the transshipment problem is a subdomain of a transportation problem where transportation may have intermediate nodes and possible changing nodes, and there is various modes of transportation could also be possible to change. So there could be many definitions of these type of transport problem could be there. One of the definition is like transshipment problem. There could be another second definition or third definition of the transport problems. So you keep modifying some of the definitions and you keep on generating these type of newer definition of the fundamental problems like transport problems. Then you have critical path analysis that we already studied, which actually identifies the longest dependent activities, that there is a sequence of activities for a project completion. So these activities are dependent on each other. Then measuring the time to complete those whole project, we need to measure the dependencies of these activities, the time taken by these activities to complete. So the critical path would be like, if this path or these type of activities were delayed in the project, then the whole project will be delayed. So we need to identify what are the activities inside those that project, and that project many activities working together, many events were going on in that project. But there are particular 4 or 5 activities or 4 or 5 events. If we delay those 4 or 5 events or activity, then the whole project will be delayed, because these are the critical activities or events. So studying about these type of critical path between those activities or events will actually help us to understand the project cost optimization, time optimization. Then the formal way of doing this is PERT. PERT chart was there to analyze and represent those tasks or activities and events involving to complete a given project. There are various type of chart could be plotted so that you can analyze the execution of these activities and events in the project management. Then you compute the time and the resources and schedule all the sequences properly to arrange and complete the project efficiently. Next, we'll see complex network. It's a subdomain of the network theories. Graph theory, then network theory, and then further subdomain as complex networks. What does complex networks is that when you start studying some network which are actually complex, which can't be studied with normal theory, then you start saying that you have a complex network. So what are the normal theories? Like fundamental theories were present. So fundamental theories could able to study simple networks, but are some network which are really too complex to study, so they can't be studied with those fundamental theories. So you need to introduce or start introducing some of the new theory, and you generate your own theory for these network analysis, and start behaving like you are a scientist. And then you actually dealing with the complex networks, means you are introducing some new theories, non-trivial top topologies features you are introducing. So all these non-trivial topological features in the network representing real systems, you start representing those real systems into your own topologies, your own way of representing those graphs, and your own way of representing those non-trivial topology features that can't be studied with normal fundamental graph theory or network theory. Then in later part, when you simplify the whole system into some complex network, and then you start applying some of the fundamental theory, may be possible or may not be possible. For example, some theory were introduced like network motifs as subgraph. You have a large graph, but you can form some of the subgraphs, and subgraph could be representing and expressed as something as a subset of that large graph. Then you start studying those subset of that large graph as a subgraph. When you start studying those subgraph, there are many theories available. One of the theory is network motifs. Motifs means patterns, sequential patterns, and that came up because that patterns occur repeatedly. So that repetition of that pattern in a graph could be said as network motif. It's like subgraph, means subpart of a graph, subset of a graph that are over represented in a network, means that is represented again and again and again. So that subgraph is patterns are actually termed as network motif. It's one of the theory that is available with the complex networks. Then what are the example of complex networks that are very difficult to be studied with the fundamental graph theory or network theory? So these are complex networks, biological networks, technological networks, brain networks, climate networks, and social networks. Basically, what does this mean? This means that these type of theories, these type of domains actually have some specialized domain. So specialized domain need to represent these network in a specialized way, and that need to be some specialized person to study those domains like computer network. A specialized person could study those biological network, brain networks. A specialized person could study this climate network or social network. Yes, they will, of course, apply the fundamental graph theories or some of the fundamental of network theory, but this can't be done directly because you need some domain expertise. So these complex network actually need highly domain experts. Then next, electric power system analysis. Electrical domain persons are required for doing this type of electrical power system analysis, where you plot a graph that consists of representing electric power aspect, where various edges and vertices could be represented as transmission line impedance. Then you have biological network analysis, in which you actually do analysis of molecular networks, and you try to visualize the nature and strength of the interaction between the various species and how you do it. For example, in a gene regulatory network, GRN, you form gene network. Various genes are being connected together. Then metabolic networks are there, protein protein interactions are there, then molecular interactions are there. So these all forms some of the network, complex network you can say, because they are specific to a particular domain. Then you have operational research in management. Management domain also needs some logistical network, that the resources will go from X to Y, Y to Z in the particular way. So this is logistical network. Then social network, that social media is actually having some understanding. And then you have epistemological network. These type of network are being studied in a specialized domain of operational research. Every domain have the domain expertise. Like the operational research is not my domain of study, to not having the expertise to study these operational research network like logistical network. So this requires some domain expert for doing this. I just have knowledge of fundamental network theories and complex system theories and systems engineering, but we need expert of operational research to study this. Next, the computer science, our domain of study. So what we do in this computer science, this is just a subset that we'll discuss for the complex network analysis. In computer science, we do graph plotting for representing various network for communication between the computers or some of the humans or some of the machines. So we represent these communication of machines and various computers with some graph. Then you have data organization which are actually communicating with each other, or some data of a particular organization could be represented as a graph, and those graph could be studied. Then you have the computational devices which could be plotted as graph. Then flow of the computation could be plotted as some graph and would be studied with the help of computational techniques. Then what are the link analysis? Very common one in the computer science, and there could be many kind of links possible in the computer science. Link structures could be of World Wide Web, www, of internet computers or servers are there for the link analysis. Then computer network means various machines of computing devices are connected together and you do the link analysis for them. One of the example that we can see is website can be represented by a directed graph. How it could be represented, this website? So vertices could represent web page of a particular website. Web page could be a vertices in the whole website. Then directed means edge is representing link. The edge will representing Links means flow of one page to another page. So when we move from one page to another page, then we can show this with the link. So this will form a graph, or you can say adjacency list or matrix. Then you have the web page representation. Then you have social network analysis. What does we do with the social network analysis? So graph with structures of relationship between the social entities could be represented with this social network analysis. So graph structures could be there for representing relationship between social entities. Then entities or various persons working together could be represented as a social network. Groups in the company or organization working together could be represented as social network for its analysis. Organizations working together, national states could be studied together with the social network. Then websites could be studied. Scholarly publications could have relationship between each other. So all these things could be studied together. In the complex system, we can represent those complex system with various ways. So we look what are the various ways to represent these complex systems. So the complex system representation could be like in the form of complex networks. That's why the both terms complex systems and complex networks are very alike. It means there's complex word. So complex systems can be represented by complex networks. And how the complex networks could be represented? It could be represented in the form of connections between various components in that system. Components could also be said as entities. Then complex network, if we talk specifically, how it could be represented in the form of graph, because complex networks are actually graphs. So vertices or nodes can represent entities or components. So vertices and nodes are representing entities, and edges or links or connections will be actually representing relationship between the components. So edges are actually representing the relationship between the components. Next, so one form of representing those complex networks are like adjacency list. And adjacency list could represent actually graphs. So graph could be represented with the help of adjacency list, which is actually the collection of a unordered list, which could actually represent some finite graph. That means that you have a finite graph which is having various vertices, and those vertices have connections, and these connections could be represented as collection of unordered list. For example, the graph shown ABC could be represented in the form of adjacency list, like A and B is connected, A and C is connected, B and A is connected, B and C is connected, C and A is connected, C and B is connected. So why we have both the type of connections? Because we have actually undirected graph. Undirected graph where both the nodes are equal and they have both connections towards each other. So A also have connection towards B, B also have connection towards A. So A, B are connected in the undirected graph like this. That's why we represented AB as well as we represented BA. So AB and BA is also there as undirected graph. So the list of connections of the set of networks, the set of network is actually contained in the list, and these list actually set of networks of those vertices that forms the graph. Then undirected graph that we had seen, ABC is an undirected graph. So the data structure could be like linked list that are used for the node representation that have the connection. So linking means connection of those node can be represented with the linked list as a data structure. Next form of representation is adjacency matrix. So the adjacency matrix is actually square matrix and that are used for the finite graph representation. And then matrix is could be like a row and column are the indices for the indexed for the vertices. Means if there is a connection, then the row and column will actually start representing for that connection. Then adjacency list is more space effective than actually adjacency matrix. The adjacency list is much better in terms of space as compared to the adjacency list. That adjacency list actually have the two-dimensional array. Then adjacency list is a simple thing as compared to the matrix. Then matrix is are actually two-dimensional representation. Matrix is a little bit more complex, but matrix has its own advantage as compared to the adjacency list. So both these types of data structure, adjacency list and adjacency matrix, you will study in detail in data structure or in mathematics or in any other things. In this course, the purpose is just to tell that these are the tools. Adjacency list and matrix are representing complex networks, and these complex networks are actually indirectly representing the complex system. So direct representation is actually adjacency list and adjacency matrix. Means at the ground level you represent those complex systems in the form of adjacency list and adjacency matrix, which actually represent graphs. And what are graphs? Graph could be said as complex network related to a particular field or domain for which the system engineering domain is working. So system engineering has complex system, and that complex system forms complex networks, and that complex network uses the graph as a tool, and that graph could be represented with adjacency list and adjacency matrix. So this is what we had done and seen in this complex systems. Then complex system representation could also be multi-layer network representation. So what is multi-layer network representation? First, we need to understand single network. The complex system could be represented with many interacting entities, and there are many interacting entities are there. We can represent those interaction as a single network. But what if we keep on dividing the properties or attributes of those vertices or the nodes? Means you are changing some properties and you want to analyze those properties. Then you need to have more number of networks. When you have more number of networks with the same nodes representing in the each network, you representing different property for the same nodes, set of nodes. This forms multi-layer network. Means you forming multiple network for the same set of entities. For the same set of entities, you are forming multiple networks. Means it is said to be multi-layer network. You have single layer of network, single network, you say simple network. Then you, when you start discriminating between the properties and features of the same set of nodes, means you are having collection of nodes and defining various properties, and based upon that properties you start representing different graphs, different networks. Then you are making various layers of networks and various layers of graph. That is said to be multi-layer network. Then the example are like social network, neural network, too much complex systems like social network, which could have multiple features, multiple variables, multiple attributes could be represented in various networks. So various networks could be said as multi-layer networks, and different network for a different purpose. The neural network is also having multiple layers. Then next, co-occurring network structure. So co-occurring network structure, what you say, there are some patterns or some motifs or some associations that actually keep on occurring, reoccurring. Means of a graph occurring at second place of a graph, occurring at third place of a graph. Then you are saying that it is a co-occurring network structure that are being made with the help of links and activities are represented with nodes, and those are the examples like community structure, and there are various communities and they are interacting with each other, so we can form a community structure with multiple links. Then dynamic properties, of some entities could be mapped with the help of these graphs and complex networks. Then dynamic entity relationship, we can say directly if we want to say, those behavior dynamic behavior of those entities can be formed into some relationship, and that relationship could be represented with the help of multi-layer networks, multiplex networks, and networks of networks. So this is very vast field of study, because there's graph available, there's network available, then there's adjacency list, then there is adjacency matrix. So all these things are almost connected to each other, and they are being used as a tool for designing those and analyzing those complex systems. Next, we'll see the software systems. Next, we'll study software systems. In this software systems, we'll study detail in the next class. Thanks.